The morning sunlight slipped through the curtains, touching the small wooden table where 2 cups of tea sat side by side. The smell of toast and butter filled the kitchen as David smiled across at his wife. It had been their routine for more than 40 years. Tea, breakfast, and a quiet talk before he went out to tend the garden. Their house stood at the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by trees and open fields. Life was calm, almost perfect. Eleanor moved slowly that morning, folding a napkin carefully in her hands before setting it down. David noticed, as he often did, how her hands trembled a little more these days. Still, she smiled at him the same way she always had, gentle, kind, and full of warmth. To him, that smile meant everything. He often thought about how lucky he was. He wasn't a man who had seen much adventure or wealth, but he had found something better: peace and love. They had built their life from almost nothing. When they married, they lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, saving every penny to one day buy their own home. Years later, they moved to this small house where they raised 2 children who had now grown and started families of their own. To anyone who saw them, David and Eleanor were the picture of happiness. Their neighbors often said they were made for each other, and in many ways they were. David could fix almost anything around the house, and Eleanor had a way of turning even the dullest day into something warm and beautiful. But there were small moments, tiny cracks that David sometimes noticed. When they looked through old photo albums, Eleanor would turn a page too quickly. When someone mentioned their early years, she would smile faintly and change the subject. Once he caught her staring at an old box of letters, tears welling in her eyes. When he asked what was wrong, she simply said, "Just memories." And David, being the kind man he was, never pushed her. He trusted her completely. He always believed that love was about giving space, about knowing that every person had a past. He thought whatever memories she carried were just part of who she was. He never imagined they could hold something she had hidden from him all those years. On weekends, David and Eleanor liked to walk down the narrow path behind their home that led to a small pond. They would feed the ducks and sit quietly, watching the water ripple in the sunlight. Those were the moments David cherished most. He would reach for her hand and say softly, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She would smile, squeeze his hand, and whisper, "You won't ever have to find out." But time has a way of changing even the things we think will last forever. That summer, Eleanor began to feel tired more often. At first, she brushed it off as age, but soon the tiredness turned into weakness and weakness into pain. David convinced her to see a doctor. When the results came, the air seemed to leave the room. It was serious. From that day on, their lives changed quietly. David became her constant companion, her shadow. He learned how to make her favorite soup, how to help her in and out of bed, how to smile even when his heart was breaking. Their children visited often, bringing laughter and noise to the house, but when they left, the silence felt heavier than before. Eleanor never complained. She spoke softly, always asking how everyone else was before talking about herself. She didn't want anyone to worry, but sometimes in the stillness of the night, David would wake up and hear her crying quietly beside him. He would hold her hand and she would whisper that everything was fine. He wanted to believe her. As the months passed, David noticed her spending more time writing. At first he thought she was keeping a journal, something to pass the time. But one evening when he walked into the living room, he saw several envelopes stacked neatly on the table. Each was sealed and marked with a name. Some were familiar. His, their children's. Others were names he didn't recognize. He asked her about them, but she smiled faintly and said, "Just something I need to finish." He didn't press further. He trusted that she had her reasons. But late one night when she was asleep, David sat in his chair, thinking about the years they had shared. He began to wonder about the small silences in their marriage, the moments when her eyes grew distant, the way she sometimes stared out the window as if remembering something she couldn't say. He told himself everyone had secrets, but still, the thought unsettled him. One morning, while tidying her dresser, David found a small photograph tucked inside an old jewelry box. It was faded and worn, showing a young Eleanor holding a baby. The picture looked old, taken long before he had met her. His breath caught for a moment. He turned the photograph over, hoping for a date or a name, but there was nothing. He stood there for a long while, staring at the image. It didn't make sense. He had seen pictures from her childhood, her school days, her nursing job, but never this one. Why had she kept it hidden? He thought of asking her, but decided against it. She was too weak now, and he didn't want to upset her. Maybe it was a relative's baby, he told himself. Maybe a cousin or a friend's child. That evening, he sat beside her as she rested. Her breathing was soft, steady, but her face looked pale under the lamplight. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "You've always taken care of everyone else. Let me take care of you now." She smiled faintly, and for a moment the worry left his heart. In the days that followed, her condition worsened. The doctors came more often, their words growing quieter each time. David refused to leave her side. He stopped working in the garden, stopped going to town. His life now revolved around her, helping her eat, adjusting her pillows, reading her favorite books aloud even when she was too tired to listen. Sometimes, when she dozed off, David would study her face. He knew every line, every expression. He thought about how much they had shared, the laughter, the arguments, the long nights waiting for their children to come home. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she had never told him, something she carried alone all these years. One night she opened her eyes and found him watching her. She smiled weakly and said, "You look worried." He tried to smile back. "I'm just thinking," he said softly. "About what?" "About us. About how we've lived a good life together." She reached for his hand. "Yes," she whispered, "we have." Then she paused, her eyes drifting toward the window. "You've been good to me, David. Better than I deserved." He frowned slightly. "Don't say that. You've given me everything." She didn't answer. Her eyes filled with tears she quickly wiped away. David felt something stir in his chest, fear, confusion, but he didn't ask. He only leaned closer and said, "Rest now. We'll talk in the morning." But as he turned off the light and lay beside her, he couldn't sleep. The photograph, the letters, her words, they all swirled in his mind. He didn't know it yet, but the truth she carried would soon change everything he believed about their life together. For now, he only knew that the woman lying next to him, the woman he had loved for more than 40 years, was fading away. And that somewhere inside her heart, there was a story she had never told, a story she was finally preparing to share before it was too late. The rain tapped gently against the window as David sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed. It had been 3 weeks since she was admitted. The doctors said they were doing all they could, but David could see the truth in their eyes. They spoke softly, avoided promises, and left the room quickly after their rounds. He didn't need to be told that time was slipping away. Eleanor was awake but weaker now. Her voice came out faintly like a whisper carried by the wind. Still, she tried to talk to him every day. She didn't want their last days together to be filled with silence. Sometimes she asked him to tell her stories, about their early days, about the garden, about the little things they had done as a family. David did it gladly, even when his throat tightened. He wanted her to feel normal, even here, surrounded by machines and soft beeping sounds. One afternoon, while the rain poured harder outside, Eleanor asked him to open the small drawer beside her bed. Inside was a bundle of envelopes tied together with a thin ribbon. David recognized them instantly. These were the same letters he had seen at home. He looked at her questioningly, but she smiled weakly and said, "Don't open them yet. Just keep them safe." He nodded and placed them gently back in the drawer. Her hand reached out for his and he held it, feeling how fragile it had become. "You always take care of everything," she whispered. "Even me," he smiled sadly. "That's what love is for." Her eyes glistened with tears. "You've been so good to me, David. Better than I ever thought I deserved." He frowned, hearing those words again. "You keep saying that," he said softly. "Why would you think you don't deserve it?" She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the window and her lips trembled slightly. "Sometimes," she finally said, "people make mistakes that follow them for the rest of their lives. Even when everything seems perfect, the heart remembers." David wanted to ask what she meant, but she closed her eyes, pretending to fall asleep. He sat quietly, watching her chest rise and fall, trying to calm the storm in his mind. That night, back at home, the house felt unbearably empty. He made himself a cup of tea but didn't drink it. He wandered through the rooms, looking at the life they had built, the photos on the wall, the books she loved, the chair where she used to sit and knit while watching the evening news. Everything On the kitchen counter, he noticed her old handbag. Inside, he found a small notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but near the end, a few lines were written in her neat, careful handwriting. The first line stopped him cold. Before I met David, I made a choice that changed everything. He closed the notebook quickly, heart pounding. He didn't want to read more, not yet. He felt as though opening that door might break something he wasn't ready to lose. The next morning, he returned to the hospital early. Eleanor was sitting up, looking out the window at the pale sky. She smiled when she saw him. "You always come before visiting hours," she said softly. "I can't stay away," he replied, pulling a chair close to her bed. They talked about small things, the weather, their children, the garden. But David noticed how she avoided any talk about herself. She was quieter now, as if she were keeping her strength for something important. In the evenings, when the nurses dimmed the lights, Eleanor would sometimes drift into half-sleep. Her lips would move, whispering names he didn't recognize. Once he heard her say Thomas and then, "I'm sorry." The name stayed in his mind for days. He asked their daughter later if she knew anyone by that name, but she shook her head. "No one I can think of," she said. "Why?" "No reason," David lied. He didn't want to worry anyone. But deep inside, he knew there was something he was missing, something that connected all the quiet moments, all the unspoken words over the years. One evening, when the hospital lights were dim and the hallway sounds faded, Eleanor asked him to sit closer. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything," he said quickly. "When I'm gone, don't be angry. Please. Whatever you find out, just remember that I loved you. Every day. Every minute." His throat tightened. "You don't have to say that." "I know you did." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You think you do," she said softly. "But you don't know everything. And when you do, I just hope you'll still look at me the same way." He wanted to ask what she meant, but her breathing grew heavy, and the nurse came in to adjust her medicine. When she finally drifted to sleep, he sat there for hours, her words echoing in his mind. "Whatever you find out, what could there be left to find out after all these years?" Days passed like slow-moving clouds. The doctors said her condition was stable, but David could see the truth. She was getting weaker, her body shrinking against the bed sheets. Still, she smiled whenever he walked in. That smile, even now, could light up the whole room. One afternoon, while the nurse helped her eat, David stepped outside for air. He needed a moment to breathe. Near the hospital's garden, he sat on a bench and watched people pass by. Families visiting loved ones, nurses hurrying down the paths, a little boy holding flowers too big for his hands. Everything around him reminded him how fragile life was. He reached into his pocket and took out the small notebook he had found at home. He hesitated for a long moment, then opened it again. Beneath the first line, more words were written. "I was young, scared, and alone. I thought I could fix everything by pretending it never happened. But the past doesn't disappear just because you wish it away." David's chest tightened. He turned the page slowly. "When I met David, I thought I could start over. I didn't tell him because I didn't want to lose him. He was kind, gentle, everything I had prayed for, but I always knew one day I would have to tell him." He closed the notebook again. His hands shook slightly. He didn't know what to feel, fear, confusion, sadness. What was it she hadn't told him? He looked up at the hospital window where her room was, a wave of love and pain washing over him. Whatever secret she held, he knew it was hurting her to keep it. That night, as the rain returned, David sat beside her again. She was half asleep, her breathing shallow. He leaned closer and whispered, "You don't have to hide anything from me. Whatever it is, I'll understand." Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked like the young woman he'd fallen in love with decades ago. She smiled faintly and said, "You've always been too good to me." "Just tell me," he said softly. "Please," but she shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "Soon." And then she closed her eyes again, her hand resting lightly in his. David sat there in the dim light, his heart pounding. He didn't know what truth was waiting behind her silence, but he could feel it drawing closer, like a shadow moving toward the light. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, the woman he loved was holding on to a secret that had lived in her heart for a lifetime. And David, still believing their love was perfect, didn't yet realize that the truth she carried would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he had shared his life with. The days in the hospital began to blend together. Morning light would filter through the blinds, nurses would come and go, and David would sit quietly beside Eleanor, holding her hand as if by doing so, he could somehow keep her here a little longer. Her body had grown weak, but her mind was clear, and there was something in her eyes, a weight he couldn't name, a story that wanted to come out but still lingered in the dark. One evening, as the sky outside turned orange and pink, Eleanor asked for the room lights to be dimmed. She told the nurse she wanted to speak to her husband alone. When the door closed and silence filled the room, she turned her head slowly toward him. Her breathing was shallow, and she took a moment before speaking. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. David's heart began to race. He had waited for this moment, though part of him wasn't sure he was ready for whatever she was about to say. He leaned closer, gently pressing her hand. "I'm listening," he said softly. Her eyes glistened with tears. "Before I met you, before our life together, there was someone else." He stayed quiet, afraid to interrupt. "I was young," she continued, her voice shaking. "Barely out of school. I fell in love with a man I thought I would spend my life with. He wasn't like you. He was wild, full of dreams, always chasing something bigger. I loved him because he made me feel alive. But one day he disappeared. No letter, no goodbye. Just gone." David's throat tightened. He wanted to ask questions, but the way she spoke, soft, broken, made him stay silent. She wasn't just telling him about another man. She was revisiting a wound that had never healed. "I found out weeks later that I was pregnant," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "I was terrified. My parents were strict, my friends didn't understand. Back then, people didn't forgive mistakes easily. I didn't know what to do. I hid it for as long as I could." David closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his cheek. He could picture her, young, scared, completely alone. The thought tore at his heart. "When the time came," she went on, "I went to stay with an older woman my mother knew. She helped me deliver the baby in secret. It was a girl. She was so small, so beautiful. I remember holding her and thinking, how could something so innocent come from so much pain?" Eleanor stopped speaking for a moment, her hand trembling in his. The machines beside her hummed quietly. David waited, letting her take her time. "I wanted to keep her," she whispered. "I wanted to hold her forever. But the woman who helped me said I couldn't. My family would find out, my life would be ruined. I was young and scared, and I let them take her away. They said she would go to a good family, that she'd have a better life. But I never stopped thinking about her. Not one day." Her voice cracked and tears streamed down her face. David gently wiped them away, his own eyes filled with tears. He didn't know what to say. He felt as if the air had left the room, leaving only the sound of her confession echoing in the silence. "After she was gone," she continued, "I tried to move on. I moved to another town, started working at the hospital. That's where I met you. You were kind and patient. You never asked too many questions. For the first time I felt safe again." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were still wet. "When we got married, I told myself that my past didn't matter anymore, that I could start over. I thought if I loved you with all my heart, maybe it would make up for what I'd done." David took her hand in both of his. His chest ached, but not from anger. He could see how much she had suffered, how heavy the burden had been all these years. "You didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "You were just a child." She shook her head slowly. "I should have told you," she said. "You deserved to know. Every time I looked at our children, I thought of her. I wondered if she was happy, if she looked like me. I almost told you so many times, but I couldn't find the courage." David pressed her hand to his lips. "You don't need to be afraid now," he said softly. "You can tell me everything." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. "A few years ago, after our children left home, I started searching for her. I didn't tell anyone. I went through old records, adoption files, anything I could find. It wasn't easy. So many years had passed, but then I found a trace." Her voice grew weaker, but her eyes burned with emotion. "She's alive, David. She's grown now, living not too far from here. I found her picture once on a local charity website. She looks happy. She has children of her own. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to cause her pain. So I just watched from a distance. David sat motionless, trying to take it all in. The woman he had loved all his life had carried this secret alone, out of fear and love. And the child she had lost was out there somewhere, living a life that had once seemed impossible. He spoke quietly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you'd see me differently. I didn't want to lose you. You've been the one good thing in my life that I didn't want to risk." David's eyes filled again. "You wouldn't have lost me," he said. "You could never lose me." For a long time they sat in silence. The only sound was the faint beeping of the monitor beside her. The truth was out now, and even though it hurt, it also felt like a release, like something heavy had finally been set down after years of being carried in secret. Eleanor's breathing grew slower. "I'm sorry I waited so long," she said. "But I couldn't leave without telling you." David leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he whispered. "You've carried this alone for too long," she smiled weakly. "I wrote her a letter," she said. "It's among the envelopes. I never sent it because I didn't know if she would want to know me. Maybe you can give it to her, when I'm gone." His throat closed. "Don't talk like that," he said. "You're not going anywhere." But she smiled again gently. "We both know that's not true. Promise me when the time comes you'll find her. Tell her I loved her every single day, even when I couldn't be there." David couldn't speak. He nodded, his eyes wet, his heart breaking in quiet pieces. That night after she fell asleep, he sat beside her bed in silence. He thought about all the years they had spent together, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet evenings by the fire. He realized now that love wasn't about perfection. It was about forgiveness, about seeing someone's scars and still choosing to stay. He looked at her, frail but peaceful, and whispered, "You've always been my heart, Eleanor. Nothing will ever change that." She stirred slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile as if she had heard him even in her sleep. The storm that had been locked inside her for decades had finally been spoken into the light. And though the truth was painful, David felt something unexpected. Relief. He wasn't angry. He only wished she had never felt so alone. Because if there was one thing he knew with certainty, it was that love didn't disappear because of the past. It only grew deeper when the truth finally found its way home. The following days moved slower than ever. David rarely left Eleanor's side. Even when she slept, he sat quietly, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that if he looked away, she might slip away without a word. The hospital room felt both heavy and sacred now, like every breath, every whisper, every small glance carried meaning. He kept replaying her confession in his mind. It felt unreal, like a story from someone else's life. Yet deep down, he knew it explained so much. The moments of sadness she couldn't explain, the time she stared at the horizon as if searching for something lost. All those years she had carried the weight of her secret with such quiet strength, never letting it spill into their life together. Now he understood why she sometimes cried for no reason, why she kept those old boxes tucked away under the bed. One afternoon, while she rested, David stepped out for a walk around the hospital garden. The air smelled of wet grass after a light rain. He sat on a bench beneath a tree and pulled the small notebook from his pocket again. It was the same one he had found at home, and now that he knew the truth, he read it differently. Every word felt heavier, every line touched with guilt and longing. There were notes about the baby, small details that showed how deeply she had loved her. "She had my eyes," one line read. Another said, "I dreamed I was rocking her again," and she smiled. He closed the notebook and stared at the sky. It broke his heart to think how much pain she had carried alone. He thought about their children, about the life they had built together, and realized how strong she had been to live with that kind of secret without letting it turn her bitter. He wished she had told him sooner. He wished he could have shared that pain with her instead of letting her fight it alone. When he returned to her room, she was awake, looking toward the window. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow on her face, and for a moment she looked almost peaceful. He sat beside her and smiled. "You look beautiful," he said softly. She gave a faint laugh. "You always say that, even now." "Because it's true," he said. They sat quietly for a while. Then she turned her head toward him. "Do you think I was a bad person?" she asked suddenly. He shook his head. "No, you were just human. You were young and scared. You made a choice you thought was right." Tears gathered in her eyes. "But I lied to you." "You didn't lie," he said gently. "You just couldn't tell me. And I think deep down, I always knew there was something you carried. I just didn't know what it was. Her lips trembled and she reached for his hand. I wish I had been brave enough to tell you sooner. David squeezed her hand. You told me now. That's what matters, she smiled faintly. You've always been too kind to me. Later that evening, she asked him to open the drawer beside her bed. Inside were the same envelopes she had asked him to keep safe. There's one for you, she whispered. And one for her. The others are for the children. Promise me you'll make sure they get them. He nodded, unable to speak. He placed the letters back gently and sat beside her. The sound of her breathing was soft but uneven. She looked tired, like her body was giving up even while her heart still wanted to stay. David, she said after a pause. There's one more thing. He looked at her. Waiting. I saw her, she said slowly. Not long ago, his eyes widened. You mean, your daughter? She nodded weakly. I told you I found her through that charity group. One day she was volunteering at a local event in town. I went there just to see her from a distance. She didn't know who I was, but I saw her laugh, talk to people, help children. She looked happy. I wanted to go up to her to tell her everything, but I couldn't. I stood there for almost an hour and then came home. That was the day I started writing those letters. David's eyes filled again. He could imagine her standing there, watching the child she'd once held, fighting the urge to run to her. That must have been hard, he said softly. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, she whispered. But also, the most beautiful. I finally knew she was okay. That gave me peace even if I couldn't tell her who I was. He took her hand and kissed it. You've carried so much love in your heart, he said. She would be proud to know you. Eleanor smiled faintly, but her eyes were already growing heavy. Promise me you'll find her after I'm gone. Tell her she was always loved. Tell her I never forgot. He held her hand tightly. I promise. Over the next few days, her condition worsened. The doctors spoke gently, using soft words, but David didn't need them to explain. He could see it. Every breath she took seemed harder than the last. Their children visited, filling the room with quiet tears and whispered prayers. But even in the middle of all the sadness, Eleanor looked peaceful, as if finally, after all these years, her heart had let go of the weight it carried. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, David sat alone beside her bed. The room was dim except for the faint light from the window. The world outside was silent. Eleanor's hand rested in his, her fingers cold but still responsive when he squeezed them gently. He leaned closer, his voice trembling as he spoke. You know, he said softly, when I first met you, I never thought a person could change my whole life. But you did. You made every day worth living. And even now, after everything you told me, I don't see you any differently. If anything, I love you more for the courage it took to finally tell me. A small tear rolled down her cheek. She tried to speak, but her voice came out barely above a whisper. You always kept your promises. So did you, he said. They stayed like that for a long time, neither saying much, just being together. Words weren't needed anymore. Every silence, every breath carried years of love between them. At one point she stirred slightly and said, When I'm gone, don't be lonely for too long. You'll still have her. And the children. You'll have them all. He shook his head. No one could ever take your place. She smiled gently, her eyelids growing heavy. Maybe not, but you can still share the love you gave me with others. That's what keeps love alive. Her hand loosened slightly in his. He held it tighter, unwilling to let go. Her breathing slowed, then steadied, then slowed again. The nurse came in quietly, checking her pulse, adjusting her blanket, and then left, leaving them alone again. David sat through the night, listening to the faint rhythm of her breath. Every few minutes he whispered something to her. Small memories, words of love, fragments of a life they had shared. He told her about the garden, about the way the flowers were starting to bloom again, about how their children still called to check on her every day. He wanted his voice to be the last thing she heard. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Eleanor opened her eyes one last time. She looked at him, her gaze soft and full of peace. Thank you, she whispered. For what? He asked, barely able to speak. For loving me even when I couldn't love myself. He pressed his forehead against hers. Always, he whispered. Always. A faint smile crossed her face, and then gently she closed her eyes. Her hand went still in his. For a long time he sat there, unable to move, unable to believe she was truly gone. The room was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full, of her voice, her laughter, her love that still lingered in the air. Outside, the sun rose slowly, painting the sky with light. And in that quiet moment, David knew her story wasn't over. There was still one promise left to keep. The letter, the daughter, the truth she had waited her whole life to tell. The days after Eleanor's passing felt unreal for David. The house, once full of laughter and soft music, was now quiet in a way that hurt. Every corner reminded him of her, the kitchen where she used to hum while cooking, the chair by the window where she read every evening, the scent of her favorite perfume still faintly lingering in their room. He moved through the house like a man walking through memories. Sometimes he'd catch himself calling her name out of habit, only to stop mid-sentence and feel the silence press back. He missed her voice, her gentle touch, her small reminders to eat on time. Grief came in waves, sometimes soft, sometimes so strong it nearly knocked him down. After the funeral, when friends and neighbors stopped visiting and the house grew still again, David finally remembered the envelopes she had left behind. They were tucked neatly in the drawer beside her bed. He took them out and spread them across the table, one with his name, one addressed to the woman Eleanor said was her daughter, and others for their children. His hands trembled as he opened the one meant for him. Her handwriting was neat and careful, the same way she always wrote her grocery lists or birthday cards. David, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to hold your hand, but I want you to know how deeply I loved you. You were my safe place, my calm, my home. There were days I wanted to tell you everything, but fear always stopped me. Not fear of your anger, but fear of breaking your heart. You gave me a life full of kindness, and I didn't want to add pain to it. He paused to wipe his tears before continuing. I kept the secret for so long that it became part of me, but now that you know, please don't see it as betrayal. See it as a woman's mistake made in her youth, a mistake that haunted her forever. The baby I gave away grew into a woman. I saw her once and she looked happy. That's what gave me peace. I hope you can find her and give her the letter I wrote. She deserves to know who she came from, even if it's late. The letter ended simply. Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't think I deserved it. Love always, Eleanor. He sat there for a long time, the letter resting on his lap. It was her voice again, gentle, full of emotion, and so purely her. It made him cry, but it also gave him strength. She wanted him to finish what she couldn't. The next morning, David made a decision. He would find her daughter, not for curiosity or closure, but because he had promised. He started by calling the charity organization Eleanor had mentioned. After explaining who he was, the woman on the phone sounded sympathetic but said she couldn't share personal information without permission. Still, she agreed to pass along a message. Days went by with no response. Just when David began to think it was hopeless, his phone rang. A soft female voice spoke on the other end. Mr. Thomas? My name is Lily. I was told you were trying to reach me. David's heart pounded. Yes, I was, he said quietly. I knew your mother. There was a pause. My mother? You mean my adoptive mother? He hesitated. No, I mean, your birth mother. Silence filled the line. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. I don't understand. My birth mother died a long time ago, didn't she? He took a deep breath. She passed away recently. But before she did, she told me everything. And she wrote you a letter. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Lily whispered, Can we meet? A week later, they met at a small cafe in town. David recognized her the moment she walked in. She had Eleanor's eyes, the same warmth, the same quiet strength. She looked nervous, holding a small handbag close to her chest. Thank you for meeting me, he said softly as she sat down. She nodded. I wasn't sure if I should come. It's all a lot to take in. I understand, he said. He reached into his coat and handed her the sealed letter. This is from your mother. She wanted you to have it. Her hands shook as she took it. For a moment, she just stared at the envelope, tracing the handwriting with her fingers. Then slowly she opened it and began to read. David watched her eyes move across the page, watched as her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to tears. When she finished, she held the letter to her chest and whispered, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, David said gently. She just wanted you to know she never stopped thinking about you. She carried you in her heart her whole life. Tears streamed down her face. I always wondered who she was. I used to make up stories about her when I was little. Sometimes I imagined she was someone who couldn't keep me, but loved me anyway. I guess I was right. David smiled faintly. You were. They sat there for a long while, sharing stories. He told her about Eleanor, how she loved flowers, how she always stopped to help stray cats, how she laughed when the kids played tricks on her. Lily listened quietly, wiping her eyes now and then. She sounds like the kind of person I wish I'd known, she said softly. She would have loved you, David replied. She was so proud when she saw you helping others. It gave her peace. Lily smiled faintly. Then maybe she knew me better than I thought. When they said goodbye, she hugged him tightly. Thank you for finding me, she whispered. It means more than you know. After she left, David sat alone in the cafe for a while, thinking about how strange life could be, how one truth could change everything, and yet somehow bring healing at the same time. In the weeks that followed, Lily visited often. She met David's children, who welcomed her warmly. At first there was hesitation, but soon laughter returned to the house. They shared stories about Eleanor, looked through old photo albums, and even visited her grave together. Lily placed a bouquet of white lilies there, the same flowers Eleanor used to love, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." David stood beside her, feeling something lift inside him. For the first time since Eleanor's death, the sadness in his heart began to ease. He could almost feel her presence, watching them, smiling. Life slowly found rhythm again. David tended to the garden she had loved so much. Sometimes, when the sun set and the air turned golden, he would sit on the porch, close his eyes, and remember her voice saying, "Promise me you'll keep loving life." He did. He kept that promise. One evening, months later, Lily stopped by with her husband and children. They brought homemade pie and laughter with them. The house was filled again, with life, warmth, and the kind of joy that Eleanor would have loved to see. After everyone left, David sat by the window, looking at the stars. He felt peaceful. The secret that once weighed heavy had turned into something beautiful, a bridge between two families that were never meant to meet, yet did. He whispered softly into the night. She found her way home. "Ellie, you can rest now." And though the room was quiet, he could almost hear her voice again, gentle and full of love, saying, "Thank you for keeping your promise." David smiled. He closed his eyes, letting the night surround him. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt light. The pain of loss had turned into a quiet gratitude, for love that lasted, for truth finally spoken, and for the peace that comes when hearts find their way back to each other. And in that silence, he knew her story, their story, would live on.